The sheriff handed me an eviction notice for my own damn ranch. 200 acres that's been in the Hawkins family since 1923, and some HOA president with a spray tan and a power suit claimed it belonged to her community. I was standing on gravel that 3 generations of my kin have walked, staring at a piece of paper telling me to pack up and get out in 30 days. I didn't know whether to laugh or go get my shotgun. The smell of diesel from my cattle truck was hanging in the humid air, mixing with the morning coffee that was still warm in my hands. And there she was, Jennifer Blackwood. I'd never seen the woman before in my life, but she was standing there claiming my ranch was illegally subdivided from her Willowbrook development land. This very dirt where Sarah and I built our retirement dream, where I scattered her ashes under our old oak tree just 18 months ago. Ma'am, I said, trying to keep my voice level, this land predates your little subdivision by 40 years. Jennifer just smirked, that cold, practiced look of someone who thinks they've already won, and said, "Not according to our master development agreement, Mr. Hawkins." She picked the wrong man to mess with. 30 years as a petroleum engineer taught me that when someone makes a desperate grab like that, they're usually hiding a massive leak somewhere else. I'm Gerald Hawkins, 58 years old, a retired engineer who thought raising cattle would be the quiet, final chapter of my life, but I guess the universe had other plans. Sarah and I bought this place 15 years ago. 200 acres of Texas hill country where the only sounds were the cattle lowing and the wind whistling through the oaks. We spent every weekend out here, walking the fence lines, planning a new barn, talking about the grandkids we hoped would visit someday. Then cancer took her, and it took her fast. The medical bills ate through our savings like a drought kills grass, leaving me with nothing but this land and a whole lot of stubbornness. I still talk to her photo every morning over coffee. "Morning, sweetheart. Cattle look good today. Miss you, something fierce." And then Jennifer Blackwood entered my life like a Category 5 tornado in designer heels. The first time she showed up, she was clicking across my wooden porch in shoes that probably cost more than my monthly feed bill. Perfect blonde hair, a suit that didn't have a single wrinkle, and a BMW X7 parked next to my beat-up Ford like a spaceship next to a covered wagon. Her perfume hit me before she even spoke, something expensive and sharp that made the cattle uneasy 50 yards away. "Mr. Hawkins, I'm Jennifer Blackwood, president of the Willowbrook Homeowners Association," she said, holding out a manicured hand while waving those official-looking papers. She had this way of talking, real smooth, the kind of voice she used to convince new residents that the community pool was just in the permitting phase while she was actually pocketing their dues. I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Ma'am, I don't belong to any HOA. This ranch was here before your development was even a twinkle in a developer's eye." But her smile turned ice cold. She started talking about reversionary clauses, legal mumbo-jumbo that basically meant if her paperwork was right, I'd lose everything without getting a single dime in return. "Lady," I told her, "the only thing reversing here is you off my property." She didn't skip a beat, just pulled out her phone and dialed 911 right there in front of me, claiming property theft and threats. 20 minutes later, my friend Deputy Martinez was apologizing while handing me court papers. Jennifer stood by his cruiser, looking like a cat that just found the keys to the creamery. The lawsuit claimed my land was carved out illegally, and the community had a right to reclaim it. I walked over and touched the rough bark of the oak tree where Sarah and I had carved our initials, where she'd whispered to me, "Promise me you'll fight for what's right, Gerald, even when it's hard." I didn't know it then, but I was looking at the first move in a chess game where Jennifer had been stealing from 340 families for 12 years, embezzling nearly $3 million through a completely fake HOA. All I knew was that this woman wanted to take the last piece of Sarah I had left, and she was in for a hell of a fight. 3 days later, she filed an emergency injunction. She had these maps, neat little lines drawn around my ranch, making it look like a piece of the Willowbrook puzzle. The local news even picked it up, and there she was on TV, standing in front of my cattle gate, pointing at survey markers like she was some kind of misunderstood hero. That's when the sheriff served the actual eviction notice. I sat at my kitchen table that night, staring at that paper while the silence felt heavier than a lead blanket. Even the cows seemed to know something was wrong. Milk production dropped 20% overnight. I called Jake Morrison, the only lawyer in town I could afford. I didn't have the $5,000 retainer, but my neighbor Bill Martinez co-signed a loan against his tractor just to keep me in the game. Jake and I spent 6 hours in his office, the smell of old law books and his heavy coffee breath filling the room. "Gerald," he said, "this is either the most sophisticated fraud I've ever seen, or you're in real trouble." He pointed to a deed number on Jennifer's paperwork, 1965 to 0847. We drove down to the courthouse basement, a place where records older than disco music gathered dust. Mrs. Rodriguez, the clerk who'd been there since Nixon was in office, just shook her head. "Honey, that number was never assigned. Our system skipped from 0846 to 0848 because of a clerical error 60 years ago." My heart skipped a beat. Jennifer's paperwork was pointing to a ghost. We pulled the original 1960s maps, the yellowed pages cracking like autumn leaves, and there it was. Willowbrook was plotted around my property. We'd been here 40 years before they even broke ground. I went home and found Sarah's old handwritten notes in a survey folder. Her careful script documented every fence post and boundary marker. "Gerald, always trust the paperwork, but verify the people," she'd written. Even from the grave, she was saving my skin. Jennifer's agreement had more typos than a middle school book report. Apparently, fraud doesn't require a spell check, but her biggest mistake was claiming authority she never had. The next morning, we filed a motion to dismiss, but Jennifer wasn't backing down. She was getting desperate. She actually filed a motion claiming I was mentally unstable because of my grief over Sarah, saying I was delusional about owning the land. That was the moment the gloves came off. I sat under that oak tree with county records spread around me like evidence in a murder case. "Sweetheart," I whispered to the wind, "she thinks your death broke my mind. She's about to learn what 30 years of pressure analysis looks like when it's focused on her." Then came the first real twist. I started digging into her background and realized her Willowbrook HOA wasn't even registered with the state. No corporate charter, no legal standing, nothing. It was a phantom. But while I was building my defense, Jennifer escalated. She got a restraining order claiming I was a threat to community safety, and I got locked out of half my own ranch. I couldn't get to my water well, my equipment barn, or 50 head of my cattle. I stood there watching my cows press against the fence, confused and thirsty, while the metallic clang of the locked gate echoed across the pasture. It cost me $200 a day to board them at Bill's place, and I was bleeding money I didn't have. That's when I hired Dr. Patricia Wise, a forensic expert from Austin. She put Jennifer's maps under specialized lights and laughed. "Mr. Hawkins, whoever made these doesn't understand GPS. These reference points use satellite data that didn't exist until 1995, but the map is supposedly from 1965. Jennifer had been cutting and pasting signatures like a kid with a scrapbooking hobby. I started hiding trail cameras in fence posts and trees. I caught her crew digging up my survey stakes at 2 in the morning, planting fake evidence. And I wasn't the only one. Tom Bradley, Bill Martinez, even old Pete Garrison, we all met at Bill's kitchen table. For ranchers realizing this woman was trying to systematically swallow our land. She offered me 50 grand to sell out quietly, Tom said. When I laughed, she threatened to sue me into bankruptcy. But the biggest shock came when I called an old buddy of mine whose daughter worked for the FBI's financial unit. I met Special Agent Maria Santos at a truck stop outside town, a woman with the kind of quiet confidence that makes criminals sweat through their expensive suits. "Mr. Hawkins," she said after looking at my files, "this isn't just a land dispute. This is federal racketeering." It turned out Jennifer had been collecting monthly fees from 340 families for 12 years, $850 a month for a pool that didn't exist, security that was never hired, and landscaping the residents were doing themselves. She'd embezzled nearly $2.8 million. My ranch wasn't the goal, it was the cover. She needed to prove she had authority over the surrounding land to keep the scam going with the suburbanites. Agent Santos told me to keep playing defense. Let Jennifer think she was winning until the annual HOA meeting. 10 days of pretending I was losing my mind while the FBI traced every wire transfer and every fake email. The night before the meeting, I sat under Sarah's tree one last time. "Tomorrow, sweetheart," I said. The adrenaline was a metallic taste in my mouth. The community center was packed. Over 300 people who thought they were there for a routine vote. Jennifer stood on that stage in another $1,000 outfit, looking smug, presenting financial reports that were nothing but fiction. I stood up in the back, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Jennifer," I called out, my voice echoing in the hall. "I've a question about the legal fund on page 4. Does that cover the cost of the FBI agents standing by the exits, or is that a separate line item?" The room went dead silent. Her face went from tan to a ghostly, sickly gray in 3 seconds flat. She tried to laugh it off, tried to call me unstable again, but then Agent Santos walked up the center aisle, flashing her badge. The look on Jennifer's face when the handcuffs clicked shut. I'll tell you, it was better than the first rain after a 3-year drought. As they let her out, 340 families realized they'd been robbed of nearly $10,000 each. The pool they'd been paying for was just a hole in Jennifer's bank account. I walked out into the cool night air, took a deep breath of that Texas wind, and drove back to my ranch. I sat on my porch, looked out at the 200 acres that were finally, truly safe, and whispered, "We did it, Sarah." Now, Jennifer's looking at 20 years in a federal cell, and the families of Willowbrook are tied up in a decade of messy litigation to get their money back. It makes you wonder, though, how does someone get away with that for 12 years right under everyone's noses? Is it because we're too polite to ask questions, or are we just that desperate to believe in the perfect community she was selling? What do you think? Was Jennifer a master manipulator, or were the homeowners just not paying attention? And if someone tried to take your family's legacy, how far would you go to stop them? Let me know in the comments. I've got a feeling some of you have stories that'd make mine look like a bedtime story. Don't forget to share this if you think people need to keep a closer eye on who's running their neighborhood. Until next time, I'm Gerald Hawkins, and I'll be right here on the ranch. Would you like me to go into more detail about the specific forensic evidence we used to bust her?